And welcome to our latest episode, and maybe our last episode for a while, of Better Humans at Work. I am so thrilled today to be joined by the Chief Inclusion Officer at Baker Tilly, Shane Lloyd. Shane, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Dr. V. This is such a pleasure, and I can't wait to dive into the conversation.
Me too. Me too. So I already pre-wrote my newsletter for this week that I'm gonna plug in this video, and I wrote in right before, watch the video, and I was like, Shane's really great, credential wise, blah blah blah. But I was like, he's also just a joy to talk to. You're just like a happy, joyful. Look how big, your smile is so big, and you're just a joy to talk to. So I have already said that, and you've already delivered in our first 55 seconds. But let me share a little bit about Shane's background. So, as Chief Inclusion Officer, Shane leads the firm-wide inclusion strategy and advises executive leadership at Baker Tilly. And how many employees are at Baker Tilly, Shane?
We're a little over 11,000 right now.
11,000. Wow. So just the fact that you have that impact potentially on 11,000 people is really cool. But prior to joining this top 10 professional service firms based in the US. He also worked at Amazon, Worldwide Consumer, and global DEI teams at Amazon. We share that. I don't know have I told you? Oh, yes. We've talked about how I worked at Amazon. Okay. Anyway. So also he's held positions at Brown and Yale University, two of the nation's leading academic institutions. And he's also worked at Cook Ross, one of the world's leading diversity and inclusion consulting firms, as a consultant. In 2022, Shane was named the Washington Business Journal's 40 Under 40 list. And his work and insights have been featured in Insider, Thomas Reuters, Bloomberg, and a Netflix documentary. What Netflix documentary? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. So, fun fact, I'm featured in a Netflix documentary called Taking Up Space, Yale University, where one of my students is profiled describing the start of her experience at Yale that started with the protests against institutional racism and creating a more equitable institution.
Oh my gosh, we have to drop the link to that in the comments. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, thank you again for joining us. So we were chit-chatting before we hit the go live button about how we met. Would you mind recapping that story for the audience, Shane?
Yes. So my recollection is I read your book, Inclusalytics, and I was a huge fan. So I was raving about it to one of my former Amazon colleagues, Christy Panico, who then proceeded to tell me that you are an Amazon alum as well. And I think we had the opportunity to speak when you were doing a call for co-presenters for a presentation you're going to be doing about Inclusalytics, how people put data insights into action. And I remember thinking, I'm just going to sign up for the conversation, even though I think there's a better practitioner to co-present. And that is how we ended up speaking for the first time.
I love it. And since then, because you're very involved with the conference board.
Yes.
Do you mind sharing what the conference board is and why people, who should reach out, who should get involved in that?
Sure. So the conference board is a major think tank that spans a variety of different disciplines and industries: economics, HR, ESG, and the like. And I'm actually a part of what's called the Opportunity and Access, formerly the DEI Strategist Council. And it's a group of inclusion practitioners who are thinking about both the design of strategy and how to execute in a multi-year fashion to drive change and transformation in our organizations. And people who are interested in, rather, it spans the gamut. So for people who see themselves as keen strategists or looking to build future-ready strategies for their organization, I would definitely recommend the Strategist Council. For those who are looking about the next big thing, whatever that thing might look like for inclusion, there's an Innovation Council. And then there's also one focused on what's called optimizers. So how do we increase organizational efficiency? How do we further embed the work into the organization? How do we structure an inclusion operational plan that is deeply embedded as opposed to bolted on?
And you said they call, the committee that you're on, it's called the
Opportunity and Access.
Opportunity and Access. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing about that. And the reason I call it out is Shane was, kind enough to invite me to speak at one of
Yes.
the conference board's gatherings, and that was out in Milwaukee.
Yes.
Yes, that was fun. I've never been to. That was the only time I've ever been to Milwaukee. But
Milwaukee's fantastic.
I feel like I was in a room of like real, change makers when it comes to workplace inclusion. So I was honored to be there. I got a lot of good feedback from my talk, and since then, so you brought me in. There's Inclusalytics right there on my bookshelf. You brought me in. We met over that shared passion for DEI and data, and then since then, I've wrote a new book on allyship, and you've been doing amazing things with your work at Baker Tilly and through the conference board. So I love kind of coming back full circle, like back to Inclusalytics and the article that we wrote about, that time to change when it comes to workplace inclusion metrics and workplace inclusion outcomes, particularly, which we should be measuring. And so you reached out to me about this months and months ago. Like, what was the impetus for that? Like why did you want to write this article in the first place?
So this has been something I've been noodling on for quite a while. And part of the reason is because a few different streams come to mind. One, we know that when we think of the height of inclusion efforts, 2020 and the like, there were lots of different activities that were in the headlines. Even when I think of my experience as a former consultant, a portion of my work was strategy, and a fair amount of it was also just delivering in-person bias trainings. And we know that at the height of bias trainings, that was an $8 billion industry. So with the headlines and some of the more popularized activities, oftentimes you'd get people thinking, oh, this is it, the one thing that would help us achieve inclusion, cultivate belonging, and the like. And what I realized is, in the midst of all the headlines, in the midst of this downturn and headwinds that we're experiencing over the past year, there seems to be debate around, or rather not even debate, frankly, it would actually be good if there were debate, but there seems to be an open area where people are not considering, okay, if these are the metrics that you've tacked your strategy to, how do you effectively calibrate how fast they will move? And then the third item I would say is, even some of my colleagues at different organizations, or not necessarily people on the inclusion teams, but people who are touched by our strategies, they would say, well, this is not moving fast enough. Or why is it that an organization, I think executive representation is particularly important. And if it's not changing, my organization is not inclusive. So you would find that people are not thinking broadly, and then people also weren't effectively calibrated for how fast do certain metrics move. So all of that taken together, I thought it would be important to get an article out there that helps people understand, well, what is the pace of change for certain metrics? And then how do they actually work in an overarching strategy? We know some of the quick metrics are really good for maintaining motivation, but they may not be the most enduring and sustained activities. We know some of the boulders that we have to move are going to move a little bit slower. They're going to be a little heavier to push, require a little bit more diligence, discipline, and coordination, but they're not always going to provide the bursts of energy until you get to, we have fixed this in the system. This is now sustained, further embedded and integrated, but you're not going to get the dopamine hit that you might get with the quick wins. And how can people think effectively around, a good strategy will balance various change metrics covering various change horizons.
So I just shared, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, I just shared the link to our article, because I think it's really important to, if you want to dig more into that and check that out, now you have the link to that. I wish there was a way I could share my screen to be able to show the infographic. Yeah. So it says I can maybe do it. I think I can do it. Is it sharing? Shane, look at that. It's beautiful.
Excellent.
Can you see it? Oh, can't upload.
I can't see it just yet.
It was up for like a moment on my end. Let's try that again. Can you see it?
I see uploading, processing.
Processing. Ooh.
Come on, technology.
We can do it. We can do it. Do you see it?
Yes.
Yay!
We're here.
Oh, we did it. Look how on brand I am too. The purple and the green on the infographic matches the book perfectly.
Yes.
On brand. Okay. So Shane reached out to me. Thank you for sharing the background about that, Shane.
No problem.
Shane then reached out to me. He's like, let's work on this project. And what was interesting, that's a little behind the curtains. I was like, is this like a consulting opportunity? I was like, oh, Shane wants to hire me to do like some consulting work at Baker Tilly. And I was like, oh no, this is thought leadership. I'm like, I'm still down.
Right.
So we've had this conversation, and I really like when it comes to translation, whether it's a research or frameworks or whatever it might be, translating very complex ideas or lots of inputs into something that's easily digestible. And I find when we can like visualize it, it helps to understand it and digest it. And so after our conversation, I took a first go at this, and then we iterated and had a few more like brainstorming collaboration sessions, and this is where we landed. So yeah, I don't know, Shane, do you want to walk the audience through it?
Sure. And you're reminding me of another inspiration. Well, two things I want to say. One, I thought you'd be the best partner for this project because I was just so enamored by Inclusalytics, and the presentation you did at the conference board was fantastic. So you were literally frankly, the only person I thought, like, if I can't do this with Dr. B, I guess it's just not getting done. So thank you so much for being a great partner. And the other item I think about is Gartner. If anybody's a Gartner client, they actually have this resource that is an inventory of diversity, equity, inclusion metrics. And I remember thinking, this is very handy because for people who are either just getting their start or people who want to just get a sense of the broad view of everything that's out there, this is really handy. And when I was thinking about ways that even could be iterated upon, it's once again, even when you have the metrics, that doesn't necessarily give you insight into how long it might take to move these metrics along. And I also think that the value of the metrics, and I promise I'll get to the graphic too, is that for those who are energized by the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, I think of 2020, there was a great deal of excitement and enthusiasm and catalytic energy, but that energy is a great place to start, but that is not necessarily going to get people to, well, okay, once the energy settles, how long is it going to take to change? And then I think this is also really good calibration for people who are even opponents of the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, so that way they can understand, wait a minute, what are we reacting to and how strongly? And do we also have, essentially, wherever you fall on the spectrum, everybody gets a single source of truth around the pace of change, which I think is a value add for, all constituencies. Now, what everyone sees before them are, you have corresponding to colors, you have in the purple a set of fast-moving examples. So hosting an event, making a philanthropic donation, which is some of what we heard back in 2020. I oftentimes think of the 3 Ps of 2020 were promises, proclamations, and pledges. Now, depending on the amount of money people were spending, you could scaffold that out across several years. But the point being is making that commitment can actually be pretty quick once you find the dollars. Then in the green, you see moderate. So intern cohort hiring, lateral hires, employee resource groups. Because even if you want to, standing up an employee resource group is not that quick if you still need time to canvas and find the leaders, create a governance structure, create a sustainable model and a strategic plan, get them connected to the right people in the organization. Then in the third row, you see slower moving metrics. So policy and procedure change, reduced turnover, promotion classes, middle management composition. And then at the bottom, you see what's known as very slow, the metrics that move across multiple years. And I would say, executive leadership composition, accountability structures, talent representation in the market, partner owner representation if you're in a partnership model, for example, and then of course legislation. Because when we think of I like to think of it of a track race where you're passing the baton along to multiple people. So in 2020, we had this catalytic energy with lots of people mobilizing in the streets across the globe to call attention to racial injustice. They passed the baton to companies and corporations and nonprofits, and then somewhere in the parallelist media. Then when we think of the work that has to be done in the government to kind of create the legislative atmosphere that would be supportive of achieving these goals, that's another baton pass. But as we pulling along that race metaphor, for example, there are some legs that are going to move much faster than others. And it becomes important for us to think not just about the pace, but what scaffolding is actually needed to support longer term or slower moving or very slow metrics, because there still needs to be concerted effort and attention to making sure that those are carried through. Otherwise, some of the great activities that were done that move a little bit fast or at the moderate pace, the bottom falls out if we don't think of these longer time horizon activities.
And, a big take home I hope people get from this is that exactly what you just said, we need to be doing both at the same time. Because even just from a psychological standpoint, like for us to build momentum for efforts, we need to have quick wins in the beginning. Right. It's why we have training wheels. We want to get the kids to ride the bikes right away. Right. And then that enforces, I can do this. This is achievable, while also simultaneously working towards those more long-term goals. And the cool thing is, if you do it right, if you have a good enough strategy in place, both from a program, a strategic perspective, but also from a measurement perspective, a good measurement strategy in place, you can break up those bigger rocks in that red bar into smaller rocks that you can maybe have quicker outcomes on, to then celebrate that. Yes, we're not going to get a huge shift in representation at the executive level next year, or maybe in 5 years, or maybe 10 years, but we can start closing gaps at the front line of management level, or the management director level. We can start developing people earlier on and reducing our turnover rate, increasing our pipeline internally. How can we break it down to still work towards that long-term goal, but get those successes along the way? We need to show progress,
Right, exactly.
We can't just only focus on the bottom. And I think correct me if I'm wrong, Shane, but I feel like some workplace inclusion leaders, internal leaders like yourself, get so focused on the red bar that they negate the other bars because they don't see it as impactful. And they aren't. That's the thing. There's a direct correlation with time to change and impact.
Yes.
Right? Having an ERG event and measuring how many people attended, that is a fast metric that you can gather, especially if you can compare it to last time or compare it to other events and be like, we have 200% more people than at this event than other events, and like, why are we giving them a bunch of money and giving us like less? So you can still use these fast short-term metrics strategically, but you need, as I said, I think some workplace inclusion leaders focus so hard and solely on those long-term metrics because they feel like that's the only true impact. And then neglect all the other stuff, and then it's to their own detriment because they're not able to achieve. So, am I right there, or like am I reading that wrong?
Oh no, you're absolutely right. I was recently having a conversation with a set of leaders who were actually working on policy change initiatives within their organization. And if you look at our blue bar, anything that policy change falls in slow, and that's something that could be done within 5 years, but definitely not within a fiscal year. That'd be pretty quick. So I know for those leaders, they were actually feeling particularly dejected because they were thinking of, we noticed this issue 2 years ago. Then there was leadership turnover that pushed the timeline out. Then there was some other big org change effort that pushed the timeline out even further. And I think that having this visual actually allowed me to go back to them and say, I want to put in context some of what we've been talking about that boulder you all were trying to move and where this falls along that timeline. So you all thinking that you're not doing well because it took this long. In fact, this effort actually fell pretty consistent with the typical time estimate to get some of this policy change through. And they were kind of shocked because they're thinking, well, unfortunately, we had some turnover on our leadership board because some people thought that we weren't as effective. And I said, well, I think that that's just a reminder that, yes, we might lose some people along the way if they're not patient enough for these particular certain kinds of activities. But the other thing to think about is how do we have a good balancing act? And when we think of our leadership in our ERGs or even our executive leaders, what are the metrics that they have the most fortitude for? Are some people like, hey, bring me in on the fast action catalytic energy, great momentum, dopamine hits, and others are like, hey, I'm here for the long haul. I do not need something to happen this quickly. If others can work on the scaffolding, I'm here to get this through the finish line, whether that's going to be in a year or 2 years or several years. And what I also think is helpful about our infographic is it allows people to put other data in conversation with these metrics. So when I think of the Russell Reynolds research that talks about how executive DEI leaders tend to last within their roles for a year and 8 months, that allows us to
1 year and 8 months.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And this is before we even got to the backlash. So imagine how many strategies, if they're not dispersed effectively into other parts of the organization or embedded in other strategies, how disruptive some of that could be, because then you're not having the consistent leadership to really build capacity, scaffold things out effectively, work collaborative with the data analytics team, HR teams to see, are we making the progress that we want? Are we maintaining momentum? Are we continuing to increase broad support for these activities?
Yeah. I'm really excited about, as you said, getting this out there. The article that we wrote, I did drop that in the comments. Let me make sure I drop it on for the YouTubers out there as well. And I did want to, any final just words about the infographic, Shane, or the article? And I know we've already started talking about what the next article might be. And so, I did drop it on the chat there. But like any just closing notes for like how people should use this, and then like what's to come next, maybe with our work together or like with using something like this. This is just our first go. Like where can we go from here? Mm-hmm. Any closing thoughts?
Sure. I highly encourage everyone to, frankly, share this broadly. Share this with colleagues in the inclusion space. Share this with your employee resource group leaders. Share this with the think tanks or partners that you're working with. Let's get this in front of as many people as possible, because we're looking to your thoughts, your challenges, your questions. We did the best that we could, Dr. B and I, putting together the list of metrics that could go into each of these categories, but we know it's not exhaustive. So we're very curious to hear what metrics you think should be added. Where do you think we might have said, oh, you all are too conservative here, this could move way faster? We welcome all of that. And if you find it helpful in the calibration conversations with your ERG leaders or your executive bench, please continue to give us this feedback, because being able to accumulate some good talking points or good exercises where we can put this information to good use is just going to help us continue to strengthen the inclusion profession. We know that even with this backlash, inclusion will always matter to organizations. How the work happens or who leads the work might change, but we need more people to better understand what are the tools and tactics that help us continue to foster climates of inclusion and belonging. And we're just so glad that we made this contribution to the conversation.
Well, and contribution, right? Like that's something I really want to lean into. And it's something I feel like I have, like with the books and the thought leadership that Mattingly has put out over the years. And even when we were designing this, and Shane, you were such a great ally for me and Mattingly. And like, I'm like, should we co-brand this? You know, like, how should we do it? You're like, no, just do it all. It's all Mattingly. You know, you do your colors,
Yes,
your
take it away.
you know, like, you do it. And I want to make sure you're getting the proper credit for being my thought partner and co-author and all this. But I'm excited to continue on this journey of thought leadership with you and putting things out there. How do I stop sharing this thing? Let me see. Because Mattingly is transitioning. So let me remove this. How do we make it so we're big and this is small? Okay, so I'll just leave it like this for a second. So thought leadership. I'm excited to do more articles like this with you and get more information like this out there, especially because, you know, inclusalytics and, you know, the value that measurement in the workplace inclusion space, you know, provides. And also, you know, there has been data coming out that most organizations, they're not abandoning their workplace inclusion efforts. 10% are doubling down, which is a small number, but whatever, you know. And honestly, the ones that are bailing are just missing out on the competitive advantage, because something's not a competitive advantage if everyone's doing it, right? So people not doing it or companies not doing it makes it an advantage for the companies that are. But all this is to say, the space has shifted. And Mattingly Solutions is shifting along with it. So I mentioned at the beginning of today's episode that this might be the last Better Humans at Work for a while. And I'm so honored it was with you, Shane.
Yes,
like,
so glad to be
you're
here.
just a wonderful human. And you're a chief inclusion officer. Like, that is badass. You know,
thanks.
I love partnering with you. And I know the impact that you have both within Baker Tilly and beyond. So you're just like the quintessential, you know, host, or not host, the quintessential guest that I, as the host, wanted to bring to this show and this work, this Better Humans.
Thanks, Dr.
Of course. So all this is to say, Mattingly Solutions is transitioning from a workplace inclusion consulting firm to a thought leader institution, specifically around workplace inclusion and now allyship, now that my next book is out about allyship. And so with that being said, I want to take this off the screen, remove, let's see our beautiful faces instead. There we go. Okay, so let me just share a little bit about the rebrand. So we had trademarked 2 terms when we started Mattingly. The first was inclusalytics, because fun fact, you can't trademark a book title. Book, songs, or poems. You cannot trademark a title because it limits creativity for others, right?
Interesting.
But you can trademark a line of services. And for a while, Mattingly offered inclusalytics consulting, where we would help and either measure things or take data and help you make sense of it or whatever it was. So inclusalytics. And the other thing that we trademarked was DEIX. And that was our framework, our DEIX framework. It combined DEI best practices with that user experience.
Wise.
That research and that data, right? How do we understand the end user and collect the right data to make sure that they're getting these outcomes of these DEI efforts, you know, and what that process looks like. So DEI, as you well know, Shane, has been villainized as an acronym, as a term, as a concept. You know, I was curious about that rebrand of opportunity and access that was made. And did you have a title change as well?
So I've actually had a few different title changes, and I'll actually tell you the story very briefly. So my first title was actually Head of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging for Success, because our firm used the acronym DIBS to speak to their inclusion efforts. Then when we launched our new strategy, we changed the S from success to societal impact. So then that was another title change. And then my title was changed to Chief Diversity Officer, which actually I didn't like. mostly because I thought chief diversity officers felt very 1980s, 1990s to me. So I'm actually much happier with chief inclusion officer. In fact, I think that is an adequate reflection of the broad scope.
I love it because the inclusion is where the action happens, right? And I think people think, well, we got to get the diversity in, and then once they're there, you got to treat them inclusively, and inclusion is almost an afterthought. It's like, no, like if we get people acting in ways where others feel valued, respected, seen, and heard, regardless of demographic, we're going to see, good outcomes from that. We're going to keep people around longer. We're gonna get better work out of them because they'll be more engaged, more committed, right? So, and then we add, but then with that, and diversity specific work comes diversity as well.
Exactly.
And then the equity has to be built in, or else it all sort of falls apart.
Exactly.
But that's another article, another conversation for another day. So with all that being said, Mattingly's rebranding as well. DEIX is going out the door for a while. I'll still have the framework. It will still exist in the realm. I'm not going to scrub it out of our blog or anything like that. But we're rebranding as Better Humans at Work. Like this
Excellent.
is. I should have counted, but I think this is like episode 70 something, 80 something. So like I'm super proud of the library that we put out there. I'm honored that, as I said, you're our final guest for who knows how long, maybe forever. So we're gonna have the Better Humans at Work video series that you're watching now, and then we're gonna have a Better Humans at Work blog and newsletter, and I've already written most of this week's newsletter, which features you, Shane, and this conversation and our infographic and the LinkedIn article. And so really trying to continue to do the work. Right. That was the thing I struggled with for a while with all the backlash. It's like, I just poured 8 years of my life into DEI work. And now I just can't do it anymore. Like it just didn't make any sense.
Right.
So now I know I can continue to do it under a different name, under the name I've been using the whole time, Better Humans at Work. And that I think is going to bring even more people into the conversation, where before it was, just so DEI focused. But the work is continuing to be done. I'm seeing it happen in organizations. I see it in you. I see the work is still being done. I'm honored to be a part of it, whether it's reading my new book or hiring you for a keynote, but no more consulting right now. My consulting days are behind me for now. So thank you for being with me on this journey, Shane.
Absolutely.
And being me at this really nice turn of the page for my next chapter. And yeah, thank you for all you do to help us be better humans at work.